about them. I have enjoyment, I have concerns going forward, but there's a lot to talk about. Let's do it. High Castle. So The Man in the High Castle is an Amazon Prime series. It's based on a book by Philip K. Dick. I don't know how much of the book the show's based on, but for the show, it's an alternate 1960s America in which America and the Allies lost World War II, which lends itself to some interesting stuff, and the show does touch on interesting stuff. Because it's not just that, it wouldn't just be Nazis running everything. There was the Empire of Japan. What are they doing? They also own a bit of America, and you see that from the intro. The intro to this show is a brilliant intro. I love the song, but I also love the visuals. The visuals tell you everything you need to know. You see how the attack happened, you see the map, you see what the Nazis own, what Japan owns. It's great if a show can use his intro to tell you something about the show. Game of Thrones does that every episode. So right there, the show brought me on from its intro, but where it really shines is the fact that it feels like a lived-in world. I feel like this show really does show what would have happened had the Nazis won. Let's talk about Rufus Sewell though. He's the one where I was like, this guy is scary. He plays Obergruppenführer. That is a word and a rank among the Nazis. Obergruppenführer. But at a point you realize his name is Obergruppenführer John Smith. This dude does not have a German accent. He was an American who was like, oh, well, you guys took over and, well, call me a survivor, but I work for you now. Which is another element of this feeling like a lived-in world. It's not like Germans came over and now the Americans are not Nazis. And it's 20 years later, so the racism and the whole Aryan race superiority shit, it's so ingrained in their culture, it's not even said with animosity. It just makes it feel so concrete and established in that world. It starts to make you think that's very scary that the Nazis had a fighting chance in World War II to possibly rule the world. You know, the powers of the world. And maybe they didn't. I imagine there's gonna be some commenter like, they didn't actually hold a chance. Let's just fucking go with it. And the intrigue of this show is solidified in you trying to figure out what these films are. There are films out there, looks like news footage of some sort that a lot of people want that shows the Nazis losing World War II. Where did they come from? What are they? Is this all propaganda? Season 1, you're kind of brought on to all right, there's a world of the resistance. There are the Nazis, there are German Nazis, there are American Nazis. Then there's the Japanese Empire. All right, hold on. Kari Hiroyuki Tagawa. I butchered that, didn't I? I hope not. Maybe. Probably. Point is, Shang Tsung is the man! But he's a genuinely good dude, and that's also what I liked about this. There are good people among the ranks of oppressors, and there are also shitty people among the repressed. And that's just human right there. I mean, granted, less so on the Nazi side. The Reich doesn't really lend itself to Nazis being able to be too empathetic and carrying out that empathy without them becoming enemies of the state. Does not mean it's impossible for someone who's in the Reich to possibly surprise someone. The show starts to slip at a point when some of the side arcs start to be useless in season 2. I love the dude who owns that shop, but generally speaking, his arc is useless. And then the scary people who were villains in season 1 become ultimately anti-heroes. On one hand, I see why they did it. On the other hand, you do take away a villain. And you can say, well, the Nazi Reich as a whole is a villain. You don't need a person to be a villain. But it kind of reminded me of Deadwood, how in episode 1, Al Swearingen was straight up the villain. Then as time went on, he was the anti-hero. Same thing. And there are a couple of other things that for me kind of trip season 2 up. So where they're going in season 3, I'm kind of concerned about. Excited and concerned. I'm going to get to that in a second. But in the end, I will say The Man in the High Castle is very intriguing. It's an interesting looking glass world into our world if the Nazis had won. It makes you think, and I love a show that makes me think. Now I'm going to get into spoilers in 3, 2, 1. You've been warned. Here we go. Spoilers. A big mistake I think the show did in season 2 is the first episode of season 2, we meet the Man in the High Castle and you find out the films are actually, yes, it's multiverse. They're dealing with the multiverse. Which the fact that it is a looking glass world in a hypothetical world where the Nazis won World War II, that in and of itself tells you it is a multiverse thing. Every show or movie that shows a world that isn't actually part of your history, it's a multiverse peak of some sort. But when things start to cross over from world to world, then it becomes a multiverse show. Then it becomes a kind of a sci-fi show. The show gave you way too many answers too soon. The intrigue of what the film was, I loved that. But the fact that I have the answer and the fact that it looks like season 3 is going the full multiverse route kind of takes away from the social commentary that was Man in the High Castle for me. It was a fascinating, morbid, well-executed scenario of seeing America annexed into the Reich. The war has been long done. We are living in Nazi society. That's what hooked me on the show. For the first time, I think ever, I'm gonna say this about a piece of entertainment, it was never about the multiverse for me. It was about that. And it showed how Rufus Sewell said, is it Sewell or Sewell? I don't know. Point is, the guy who plays Obergruppenführer was saying in an interview, he was like, it shows how people have an ability to just go with it. And it's true, if the Nazis had won the war and they had come to America and annexed our country into their Reich, we would just kind of go with it. We would like to think we'd fight tooth and nail, but we just wouldn't. If they got the bomb and dropped it on Washington, D.C., we'd be like, Okay, laying down arms. Now it looks like in season 3, that promo they ran in Comic-Con, I believe it was Comic-Con, it looks like the Nazis have found out about this multiverse and they're gonna try to perfect the technology. It's no longer about the fact that Nazis run everything, it's a multiverse show about someone trying to breach through the multiverse. At that point, the show kind of becomes something like Fringe, and I really enjoyed Fringe, but I have seen Fringe. Whereas The Man in the High Castle didn't feel like sci-fi before. Granted, there is a character in season 2 who does spend the entirety of season 2 crossing over and then spending his time in our world, the alternate world to their world. So right there, the whole multiverse crossing over thing, that's not a thing that's just out of the blue that they're gonna do for season 3. It was in season 2. Just the execution right there, it just felt out of place for me. However, only fair to touch on the guy from Nagasaki who is from our world, who crossed over into their world, and they did use it to bring us some perspective. It's easy to say, well, our world's the good world and the Nazi world, that's the bad world. But someone from Japan, and especially that time in Japan, I'm sure they would prefer the world where 2 nuclear warheads were not dropped on their country. I don't know, call it a leap. So it can be used for perspective, it can waste some time, I hope they do it right. However, I take heart in believing at least that the useless characters and the useless side arcs, I believe they're done. We can just kind of move on and focus up the plot. Those are my thoughts on The Man in the High Castle, guys. Those are my concerns. I enjoy The Man in the High Castle. Those are my thoughts going forward. I hope my fears are exaggerated. They're going the multiverse route. I just hope they keep that which intrigues me about the show thus far. And I hope they stop having useless side arcs. But it really is enjoyable. Watch season 1 at least. And if you're intrigued enough to watch season 2, watch that too. But The Man in the High Castle, have you seen it? What did you think about it? Whatever you thought, comment below, let me know. And as always, if you like what you've seen here and you want to see more, click right here to see more.